Welcome to another movie plot and enjoy the memories. It begins in the 12th century during a 100-year reign of Christianity over Jerusalem. An eclectic band of crusaders passed through a French village on their way to the Holy Land. After receiving word that the powerful Sultan Saladin has unified all Arabia and plans to march on the city, the leader Baron Godfrey tells his best friend and one of the Knights Hospitaller that they'll stay here to resupply. He wishes to speak with his older brother who plots with his son the sheriff to inherit Godfrey's lands when he passes. He has no known heir, but what they don't know is that Godfrey's come here to find his heir apparent who he had in secret with the blacksmith's wife. The now master smith himself Balian lived with his pregnant wife until her miscarriage plunged her into a great depression. Because of this she took her own life and Balian now buries her at a crossroads. His abusive brother takes advantage of Balian's resolve to turn the other cheek, and the moment he looks away steals his wife's cross and orders the gravedigger to behead her. He also tries to convince their bishop that his brother's possessed, but the intelligent man knows Balian's just grief-stricken and needs him for the construction of their new church. The next day the Crusaders are delivered to Balian by his brother, who's excited to hear that they might be taking him away as an engineer. Godfrey takes the time to rest while his Muslim companion Firuz entertains the Christian children out front. The priest speaks of his brother's work as an engineer and ability to build the greatest siege weapons in the land, but Oda tells him to remain quiet while Godfrey has a word alone with his son in private. They stand beneath an engraving that reads, "What man is a man who doesn't make the world a better place?" where Godfrey attempts to persuade Balian to join them as they travel to Jerusalem and claim his rightful place as the Crusaders' heir. Balian's quick to refuse the stranger's request, who doesn't ask him twice and abruptly departs after resupplying. Soon the priest resorts to telling Balian that his wife is in hell and about her being beheaded to encourage him to leave. So at the sight of her cross around his neck the blacksmith takes revenge by running him through with a sword and letting him burn in the forge. The fugitive Balian then catches up with the Crusaders as he's heard that in Jerusalem he can atone for his sins and those of his wives. After the men set up camp and oil their chainmail, Godfrey teaches Balian some swordplay with the Italian High Guard of the Falcon. Odo takes over for some sparring when the sheriff arrives with his soldiers to try to arrest Balian for murder. Godfrey refuses to hand him over as they're all killers to some regard, so his nephew rides away and has his men open fire. Most of the band are struck down in the ensuing skirmish that sees Firuz die and Odo take a bolt to the neck. He refuses to go down until he takes out a few more of his attackers as Godfrey himself's wounded by an arrow, but manages to catch up and kill the sheriff before he retreats to the castle. After the English sergeant deals with the captives, it becomes all too clear to the Hospitaller that Godfrey will probably die from his wounds in the coming days. The survivors continue and meet up with another group of pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land, led by the ruthless anti-Muslim Knights Templars. Their bloodthirsty leader guides the Princess of Jerusalem's husband, and confronts Godfrey on his recent whereabouts to meet Balian for the first time. The Crusaders reach the port of Messina when Godfrey's suddenly on the brink of death. His final orders that his son Balian serves the king of Jerusalem while always searching for a way for Muslims and Christians to coexist. That night Godfrey knights his son with an oath to protect the weak and never tell a lie, then slaps him so that he remembers it before finally succumbing to his injuries. Balian journeys to Jerusalem across the Mediterranean when his ship's hit by a vicious storm. It sinks his vessel and all others around, leaving him alone on a shore with no other survivors in sight. Finding a horse he chases it into the desert to come across a small oasis of fresh water that saves his life. Just then a Muslim cavalier and his servant Imad confront the stranger, and challenge him to a duel over the possession of the horse as the owner of the lands. Needing it to survive, Balian refuses and the two fight, until the horseman departs out of respect for his title as a knight. On equal footing Balian quickly slays the warrior but chooses to spare the servant and have him show him the way to Jerusalem. Upon arriving at the grand entrance, Balian gives Imad his master's horse and allows him to leave the city unharmed. The grateful man promises that his qualities will be known among his enemies before leaving Balian to climb the hill where Jesus was crucified. He hopes to hear the voice of God but spends all night getting nothing, before burying his wife's cross and returning to the streets. He's soon surrounded by a group of retainers led by Almeric, who recognize Balian by his father's sword and swear to serve him as they did Godfrey. They take him to his quarters where he reconnects with the Hospitaller and gets taken on a tour of Jerusalem. The Marshal Tiberias is having Templars executed after their ruthless commander sent them to raid a settlement of Muslims, but Reynald denies the accusation and without any evidence leaves it to Tiberias to pay off the Arab lord's demands. The Marshal meets his friend's son and tonight they dine at the king's table, with the king's sister Sibylla and her degenerate husband. He spends the entire meal insulting Balian, then leaves his wife to entertain all of their guests alone. Afterwards Sibylla shows their new guest to her brother's chambers where King Baldwin IV wears a mask to hide his leprosy. Nevertheless he's a wise and sensible ruler, and tasks Balian with defending the Jews and Muslims on their pilgrimage to Jerusalem. He's given 1,000 acres of barren land and 100 families to farm it. He has them dig wells and irrigate the ground to make hundreds of acres of farmable plots. Eventually Sibylla begins visiting Balian during her travels and the two begin having an affair in her husband's absence. As Guy's busy raiding Muslim caravans with Reynald in hopes of starting a war that'll claim the kingdom for Christians alone. When Baldwin learns this from Tiberias, he reprimands the Templars but is also required to send soldiers to Reynald's castle of Csokas to defend it from Muslim retaliation. Since he's the closest, Balian's ordered to defend the fortress against Saladin alone as the lazy Templar remains safe in his castle. In order to protect the villagers surrounding the castle, Balian and his knights charge Saladin's cavalry, giving them time to flee inside. The small number of Christians are no match for the Arabian knights and are quickly cut down, resulting in only a few survivors. Balian learns that the leader of the cavalry is actually Imad, who's one of Saladin's highest-ranking generals. He returns the favor by letting Balian and his men retreat back to Csokas before Saladin's infantry begin their siege. From the opposite side of the battlefield, King Baldwin appears with his army to defend his land should negotiations fail. The two respectable kings come to the decision that the Muslims will retreat to avert the loss of many lives, while Baldwin punishes Reynald for his betrayal. He forces the mad general to kiss his plague-infested ring, then slaps him around and collapses from the stress. Tiberias arrests Reynald and they return to Jerusalem, as Guy begins to get jealous of Balian's relationship to the king and suspects an affair with his wife. Several of the Arab generals are angry about the truce, like Mullah, who confronts him about it, but Saladin still plans to launch an attack against Jerusalem when the Christian king falls to his illness. Guy's arrogance has reached a point where he's subtly threatening to kill Sibyl's child to prevent any claim to the throne. He brags about being general of the Templars while Balian only has 100 knights, so in Jerusalem Baldwin and Tiberias conspire with Balian to marry Sibylla and take leadership himself. Despite the pair's affections, Balian refuses as it requires the murder of her husband, which goes against his morals. He tells Tiberias that Jerusalem must be a kingdom of conscience and Sibylla that he won't do any amount of evil for the greater good. Because of this, when her brother finally passes, Sibylla remains married to Guy for her son's protection. He continues to seek counsel from Reynald, who advises Guy to kill Balian before he gains enough favor from the public. His attempt is to send 3 assassins to murder him at his home, but armed with a shard of pottery he kills the first and crushes the second's throat under his boot. The final almost kills him, but Balian stabs him through the visor with a dagger before passing out. It's soon discovered by the Patriarch of Jerusalem Heraclius that their new king also suffers from leprosy when melted wax seems to unfaze him. Having seen what happened to her brother, Sibylla refuses to see her son go through the same thing and takes his life herself, turning Guy into king consort and giving him absolute control over the army. He releases Reynald and has him provoke Saladin into war by murdering helpless Muslims and even killing the Sultan's sister. When Saladin sends an emissary to demand the return of her body and the surrender of Jerusalem, Guy kills him, nearly causing a fight between Tiberias's knights and the Knights Templar. The new king orders Jerusalem's entire army to assemble outside the city's gates to march on Saladin. Unknown to him, the Hospitaller found Balian and helped him recover his strength. He returns to the king's surprise and warns them not to march into the desert, but the bloodthirsty leaders all want war and leave Jerusalem completely unguarded except for Balian and Tiberias. Even the Hospitaller chooses to assist the army, and they march into the scorching desert under the belief that God will protect them. They start to perish to the sun before even reaching Saladin's army, who thrive in the desert with their understanding of the area. The entire Crusader army is killed except for the king and Reynald, but when Saladin's disrespected by the general, he executes him and adds his head to the pile. Saladin spares Guy out of a tradition of kings not killing kings, but turns him into a fool for his army as a retaliation for all his disrespect. After Balian is begged by the queen to fix her mistake, he rides out with his knights to discover the remains of her army. Seeing the head of his dead friend and knowing they'll only have a few days until the invasion, Balian prepares the defenses of the city by first making range markings for his machines of war. He gives a speech to the army to inspire hope, but the cowardly Heraclius advises him to flee the city and abandon its people. Knowing that they're all terrified, Balian has every man at arms kneel, including the gravedigger from France, and has them knighted with the same speech his father gave him. Balian promises all of his lands to Almeric as he intends to return to France if he survives the war. And when Saladin's army arrives, it unleashes barrages of stones on the city and raining down hellfire until the Christians spend the night underground. Balian knows they can't win and plans to defend Jerusalem just long enough to delay the Sultan into negotiations. This doesn't even cross Saladin's mind, who expects his 200,000 to take the city with ease. When his invading force pass each set of markers, the corresponding trebuchets open fire, devastating the Arab infantry. The Christians employ all manner of defensive strategy, including firebombs and pitch to set siege towers and battering rams alike. They use ballistas to pull the siege towers down and hold Saladin's forces back for 3 days and nights. On the second day, Balian's required to kill a flag bearer who breaches the walls but gets his arm wounded in the process. When he gets treated, we see that Sibyl's cut her hair and is helping the wounded soldiers to atone for her sins. On the final day, Saladin learns that one of the walls of the city's weak, so he has his artillery focusing. Balian inspires the Crusaders from the other side to hold the line or else their whole families die, and when the wall comes down they charge the enemy to battle atop the rubble. They fight all day until sundown, when the Muslims make their final retreat of the campaign. That night everyone on both sides burn their dead, and the next day Saladin finally agrees to offer terms for the surrender of Jerusalem. The Patriarch's the first of them to say they should convert to Islam and repent later, but Balian intends a different counterterms and talks with the Sultan alone. He says that he'll destroy every building in Jerusalem before handing it over and take 10 Saracens' lives for every single Christian. Despite the Crusaders who conquered Jerusalem 100 years ago massacring the Muslim inhabitants, Saladin offers every Christian safe passage back to Italy and intends to honor his word. When Balian asks what Jerusalem means to him, Saladin replies both nothing and everything. The city's savior returns to the cheers of everyone who just wanted the bloody war to end. He finds Sibylla and promises to be with her if she denounces her throne, and goes to get cleaned up before being confronted by Guy. He was released by the Muslims so the Christians can deal with him themselves, and wants a duel with the man who ruined his life, which he loses and begs Balian to kill him as he's lost everything anyway. But the holy man refuses and tells him that when he arises do so a night. Convinced that gods must love Balian for all that he's accomplished, Imad gives him a horse and the blacksmith rides back to France with the migrating Christians. He sees Sibylla walking among them and knows she's given up her right to rule, so he walks with her hand in hand. The Muslims rip down the Crusaders' banners and replace crosses with the crescent moon, while in private Saladin shows respect to Christian artifacts and refuses to step on the stone carving of a crucifix. Sometime later, Balian's returned to his village in France with his new wife. Knights flying the banner of King Richard I search for Balian to assist on their crusade to retake Jerusalem. The blacksmith doesn't identify himself and just tells them to continue until the Italian language turns into something else. And the movie ends.